from Indiana is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm so glad we're considering H.J. Res. 27 to block the Biden administration's new Waters of the United States rule. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this legislation and glad the committee is considering a rule for its consideration on the House floor. Over 20 states, including my home state of Indiana, signed the amicus brief with respect to the pending Sackett case before the Supreme Court. This regulation is a serious issue for many Hoosiers, whether they're land developers, business owners, or farmers. In fact, I have a statement, Mr. Chairman, from the Indiana Farm Bureau urging support for H.J. Res. 27 that I would like unanimous consent to add.
Without objection.
Thank you. It's one of the issues that I hear most about when I'm back home in my district. I hear it from farmers, from housing developers, from friends and neighbors. And I find it, we're talking about waters of the USA. Some of my constituents joke that in a hard rain, the ditch in their backyard becomes the waters of the USA regulated by the federal government. Seems a little extreme to me. But that is exactly what my understanding is of this Biden rule. I imagine that that's not unique across the country. Farmers in particular are taking issue with this rule. Are those fair statements, Representative Rouser?
Well, I think they are, and certainly my growers, my farmers back home would agree with that assessment completely.
Representative Rouser, I know this is an issue that has a lot of different facets, but as your committee has considered this issue, what is the single most compelling reason that, in your opinion, that it's necessary?
Well, again, the ambiguity, I think we've touched on this multiple different ways, but, different people have different views of a standard, basically. And you're going to have a lot of different scenarios around the country where what one person does in North Carolina, the bureaucrat that is called to ask to check it out is going to say, oh, this is all fine. Same situation somewhere else in the country, they'll be bringing down the hammer. And that's, that's not fair to anyone. Again, I'll make the point that none of us are opposed to having rules of the road. I mean, you need to know when to stop, you need to know when to yield, et cetera. But you don't need a stop sign every 10 feet. Rules and regulations should facilitate clean water and progress and prosperity, not hinder it, not be an obstacle, to it. We have the most, our natural resources that we have in this country are so plentiful. We're very blessed in that regard, but we're basically going to, run our folks out of business with this. Again, capital investment goes where it's welcome. If you have an occupation where you got to hire consultants and lawyers all the time just to keep yourself from going to jail, that doesn't sound like a very good occupation to get in. I mean, we have a hard enough time now getting folks to come back home and farm the land. Productivity for this country is really incredibly important. Rules, regulations, onerous taxes, ambiguous rules and regulations in particular just do nothing but hinder that. So all that's in the balance here.
Thank you. I want to note, because you mentioned a stop sign every 10 feet. Pardon me, Mr. Massey. I wanted to mention, since you mentioned the stop sign every 10 feet, under the Obama-era Waters of the USA rule, in my district we have Highway 37 that goes up from, it runs north and south in the state of Indiana. I would take it from Bedford, Mitchell, all the way up past Bloomington. And literally every 1/10 of a mile under the Obama-era rule, there was a sign in a ditch that said, Waters of the USA. It was even less than that, probably every few feet. It seemed a little over-regulatory to me. Permitting and regulatory compliance before Waters of the USA accounts for nearly 25% of the cost of a single-family home. The National Association of Home Builders Chairman Alicia Huey called the rule a blow to housing affordability, stating that housing affordability is already at a 10-year low. The National Association of Home Builders states, if the administration is truly interested in knocking down barriers to affordable housing, it will direct the EPA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to keep from implementing this rule until the Supreme Court issues its ruling on the Sackett case. In July of 2022, Ways and Means Committee leader Representative Kevin Brady of Texas noted that the average home price has gone up $100,000 since President Biden took office. $100,000 more. Representative Rouser, does adding more regulatory costs to housing development make it more affordable or less affordable for homebuyers?
Well, certainly less affordable, and the homeowners, home builders, and homeowners too, are going to face this rule implemented in its full form. And basically, this rule, don't be fooled. This rule really is the 2015 Obama era rule, but it's cloaked a little differently. But in effect, it's more or less the same. And one thing I might add here, I had the team count up how many times the word may is included in the regulation. 383 times. That's pretty. That's a wide. May is a wide range of possibilities.
In the state legislature, you change a may to a shall, or a shall to a may. When you change a shall to a may, the ambiguity there can lead, particularly under regulation, can lead the folks reading that statute straight into court, which again adds to the cost of doing business. My last question is for Ranking Member Larson, and I'm not trying to be coy in my question, but is Washington State the same as the state of Indiana?
Yes, we're two of the top specialty crop producing states in the country.
In all ways, Washington State is the same as the state of Indiana. In all
Washington
ways.
State's much better.
Thank you. I have never been to Washington State, so I can't argue that. Although the state of Indiana, I'd invite you to join it. It's pretty great.
I think what you're getting at is the federal-state partnership, the federalism issue, and so on. Keeping in mind, the Clean Water Act established a floor nationally and allowed states then on clean water to go up from there, but not below that. But water does not respect state boundaries, which is why the waters of the U.S. rule is called what it is, because water, as it flows, does not respect, it hardly respects international boundaries. Thinking of my friend from North Dakota and Devil's Lake and the issues they have there, but certainly the Columbia River starts in British Columbia, comes down through Washington State. The Rio Grande separates two countries. So not only does the water does not respect international boundaries, it doesn't respect state boundaries, which is why when you talk about the waters of the U.S., there's this discussion about having a standard that is called a waters of the U.S. rule. So Indiana and Washington are alike in many respects. You're better at basketball, granted, but when it comes to the regulatory structure of the Clean Water Act and the waters of the U.S., it is important that we have some minimum standards and not just let states establish their own standards. Otherwise, I'll be receiving Canada's or Oregon. I'll be receiving Oregon's dirty water, or they'll be receiving our clean water, or vice versa. I mean, that circumstance would exist no matter where we were in the country.
Thank you. Representative Rouser, to that point, would it surprise you to know that the state of Indiana implemented environmental rules that were more restrictive than the federal EPA?
No, not at all. And we're doing nothing to repeal those with this, let the record state.
And does the Trump-era rule provide a floor?
Does it provide what?
A floor of a standard.
Well, not as it relates to those individual state laws. That's a separate issue. What the Trump regulation did was it brought clarity and conformity, which, by the way, makes it a whole lot easier to enforce, which, I should add, adds to our ability to protect clean water.
Just to clarify, we're not saying no regulations.
That's right.
Thank you for your answering my questions. How much government is too much government, I think, is where this falls for me. When federal bureaucrats, by rule, are essentially, in my view, taking adverse possession of private property under WOTUS. The opponents of this bill want to regulate our very backyards. That's a step too far for me. It's a step too far for my constituents. It's a step too far for farmers, developers. It's a step too far for the American people. I'm happy to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from New York is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rouser, as the new WOTUS rule currently stands, Bottom line, simple terms, what will